Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If we could make our way to our seats, we'll kick this off. Okay, good afternoon again. For those of you who weren't in the session with me earlier, my name is Christopher Ludwig. I'm the editor of Automotive Logistics, and again, very pleased and happy to be here with all of you in Detroit. A couple of just kind of housekeeping notes before we kick off. Later on in this session, we're going to use our live function to actually do some voting, some sort of live voting where we'll ask you some questions that are put forward by our gold sponsors and ask you to take a survey. So actually, we're gonna actually ask you to log on to the system, which you don't have to, but it would be great if you did. We can get more of your responses. The way you do that, for those of you who haven't before or been to one of our conferences, you have a code, a bit.ly link, which you can see on the screen. It's also in your program. It's also on our website. And to log in, you just need your email address and your registration number, which is on your badge. So, it's right there for you. You also would have had an email this morning giving you these links, and if you click that link, it populates automatically. It makes it quite easy. So we'll explain that again as we get there, but just as a little prompt, because maybe you want to log on early and kind of see how it works, because it's a neat little feature. After this session, we're going to have the Ryder sponsored gala dinner, which is, I think, about a 10-minute drive away. We're going to have buses which take you there. They'll leave from the motor lobby, which is the lobby on the first floor near the Marriott. It's like the Marriott main entrance, so you can take the lifts down to the first floor and go to the motor lobby. And anyone who's registered for that, we look forward to joining us there. We'll give you some more of the information on that as we go along, but we'd like to kick off our session now. We've got a nice sort of practical title for it. What is it? I don't have it in front of me now, but measure, analyze, implement, succeed. There we are. Measure, analyze, plan, implement, succeed. In the context of things like big data, optimization, technology. So, making it sound quite practical and easy there, but as we kind of heard this morning, I'm not sure that that's quite that simple, obviously. We're going to actually, we'll look at the potential, though, to collect, sift, analyze, act upon the huge amount of information that, of course, we can collect in the supply chain, and how we can use that to react to demand, to serve customers better, to take waste out of the system, etc. And maybe off that, we'll also extend our conversation a bit about connected technology, about smart factories, smart supply chains, what the Germans call Industry 4.0, Internet of Things, wider automation, etc. All these very exciting things that, on the one hand, promise to improve our supply chains and our logistics, and on the other hand, can be a bit scary as well in terms of what the potential might mean for automation. I thought it was a pretty remarkable statement when Brad Jacobs this morning mentioned that maybe in the future, mobility might not be that important when you think about things like, high definition virtual reality and other kind of things. It's a pretty remarkable statement for a CEO of a logistics company to talk about mobility as being perhaps not that important. So it kind of makes you pay attention. And when somebody who spent a couple of billion on some other logistics companies is saying that he's afraid an app could take him out of business, or other companies out of business, it's probably worth paying attention to. But whether you're a Luddite or a technophile, it might seem a bit of a leap to go from supply chains that in some cases are still being run across Excel spreadsheets, barcodes and email messages, to one that's perfectly automated across warehouses, self-propelled vehicles, seamlessly linked and visible at the touch of a screen on a smartphone. But we see how fast things are going, and it's might not be here tomorrow, but a lot of the technology that's out there is out there to make that happen. I thought one of the things that struck me from the timeline this morning that we saw, like the history of technology, it's not so much that things happen so quickly, but sometimes some technology is around for a while before it really has an impact. What was it, 1971 or whatever for the personal computer, 1981 for the mobile phone. there are phones that have connected to the internet for like 20 years, but it took the design ingenuity of Apple to make that something ubiquitous. I think something could happen like in the supply chain in a similar way. The technology's there, but when it becomes more usable, when we have the right interfaces and we can connect to it, then the change can go really quickly. And so that's what we're kind of bringing together in this session, if you like, from a group of manufacturers, IT specialists, logistics companies to talk about what they're doing and what they're seeing across their supply chain in terms of big data, in terms of these new systems. So we're going to have a couple of presentations going through that, giving you real examples in living supply chains of this, and then, of course, we'll do our Q&A as well. So I'll introduce our panel. We have Anupam Garg, the IT Director of Supply Chain Quality from Johnson Controls, who will be joining the panel for the Q&A. We'll actually kick off with a presentation from Thomas Isaacs, who's from Grupo Antolin, Strategic Logistics Director at NAFTA. Scott Dewicki, leadership partner at Gartner. And last but certainly not least, will be Tom Kroswek, who's the Senior Director of Supply Chain Excellence at Ryder. So, Thomas?
My name's Thomas Isaacs, and I'm a user. I started using in college. I didn't do well in a calculus class, so I took basic stats. And I kept going. I took medium-level stats and advanced statistics. I went into the military after that, and I thought I'd kick the habit. Came back into the auto industry. Somebody put me in a Six Sigma class, and I started using again. So I just wanted to get a flavor for, the fact that I am going to be the box of rocks in the room. I'm going to try to leave everybody with a little bit of something today. I'm an operational logistics manager for Grupo Antolin North America. We're going to do a brief company overview, business brief, and geography. In fact, we're a very small Spanish company, and it's very possible that we're not well known. I'm going to offer you a couple of quick data perspectives, and then we're going to offer you just one small snapshot of a logistics data project that we did that was really becoming a launching point for where we think we're going to start tiptoeing into some big data or some data analytics activities. So trying to speak in brief, Grupo Antolin, this is releasable information because we've done a recent acquisition. Grupo Antolin is about 4 billion in euros. We are organized around 5 strategic business units: overheads, doors, seat function, lighting, and the recent acquisition of Magna Interiors has brought us interior cockpits and trim. We do have a very diversified business model, both currently and post-purchase of Magna Interiors, focusing on our core concepts. Primary rebalance, again, has been the cockpits and interior trim brought by former Magna Interiors. Boy, if there's an OEM on the planet, we'll be pleased to provide them a very cost-effective product for the interior. And just a brief overview on the geography, because I actually met a couple of people at lunch who were not familiar with our business. We are a Spanish company. We have 90 plants in Europe now. This is inclusive of Grupo Antolin and the interiors buyout. NAFTA, we've been in NAFTA, primarily Mexico and US since 1994, and have 26 factories there. In Mercosur, we also have 6 additional factories, so we understand the concept of some of the Brazilian stresses going on. And again, with 39 locations in Far East Asia, we also are trying to understand some of the stresses and flex going on there. Ultimately, what we like to say is we have 161 factories and 25 technical commercial offices. And we are where the cars are manufactured. It was an interesting point that was brought up. The tiers, especially tier 1s, tend to migrate very close to or with the OEMs, and that's certainly true for us. I'm going to offer a data perspective. Once again, I'm going to try to offer this to a very wide-ranging group of people. I believe that there are quite a few people in here who are certainly qualified industry experts. But one of the things we're talking about is data, and I want to try to connect as well to people who are not necessarily industry experts. So, while I'm describing this story, I'll let you read it because this is an experience that probably every single person in this room has participated in. And the translation for it is that how many rolls of textile will fit inside a Falcon 20 aircraft? Does this sound vaguely familiar to anyone? So I see some heads nodding. I think most of us have been in this situation, and this is where I want to step back a little bit because I want us to start talking about data foundations here shortly. I was covering for a materials manager. There was probably some stress involved, as you could tell as I was speaking with the plant, who I've edited out. But in a less than traditional fashion, I came in the next morning, and as opposed to hollering at people, what I actually did was I ran a pair of statistical analysis. One of them was capability histogram for the diameter of the rolls, and the next was a probability plot using my Minitab skills. And I'm absolutely willing to guarantee you, as you read the bottom line, I could statistically confirm that the rolls going into the Falcon 20 aircraft were not 26 inches in diameter like I was being told. In fact, they were 36 inches in diameter. Has anyone been in this type of a situation where your base data was not correct? Raise your hands. I figured we would have a little connection with that. So as we start talking about big data, I wanted to step back a little bit and say, all right, let's make sure we understand how we view the basics of the data as a concept. It is a translation of events and numbers. Do we really understand as we start moving by the end of this session into the very modern technologies? Do we understand the assumptions of how they're being collected? Is it real information? Do we understand the influences on them? And furthermore, do we actually understand the calculations and processes going on underneath it? In trying to put these thoughts together, I looked at this and said, okay, let's make sure we understand what is the event that we're observing. And I went through a mental sequence to make sure I understood. An event is going to occur. Somebody has to record it. Somebody has to count it. And these are not the same. For anyone who has ever had an email chain that's this long, once again, if you're actually trying to count the events that you think you're discussing, recording something is different from counting it. So as we continue going on through this, I said, okay, let me go back and start again. A tree falls in the forest. Someone has to see the tree fall. Someone has to record the falling tree. Someone has to count the recordings of the falling tree. Someone makes a calculation about the trees in some factor. Then we generate graphs. We do a series of emails and meetings. Trees are falling. Definitive, we have the data. A lot of trees are falling fast. And then we're going to do our analysis on falling trees. Now again, what we're talking about is the basics here, and I see some smiles in the room, but I'm going to ask everybody to step back and keep this in mind as you go throughout the discussions of big data analytics. My point is, most of us understand that mistakes in data corrupts. My question to myself and to my team is, do we recognize that misunderstandings of data corrupts absolutely? So then we're going to move into advanced data. Advanced data takes all of this and makes it more complicated, provides greater data sets, puts in more powerful statistical calculations and math. But I'm going to put a caution out there because this is something we've learned at Grupo Antolin, which is when you start working with advanced data and business analytics, what you start running to is your original data architecture limitations, which is why I think this is important, because if you're going to be doing multivariate testing or correlation analysis, regression analysis, then one of the things you have to do is you have to think about these things in advance, and I am certainly hoping Anupam is going to teach us some of those architecture items. But you have to think about them from the beginning, which is our lessons learned with Grupo Antolin, because if you notice step 10, once the tree's been graphed falling in the woods, in order for you to go further and do advanced statistical analysis and correlations, for example, tree population type, tree health, you need to have gone and either obtained the data or designed it in first. Once again, I'll ask anyone else in the room, have you been in a situation where your data was collected, you thought you had reached a conclusion, and then you found the missing piece, and you had to go back and start over again? Anybody? Yes? No? Maybe? One or two hands? Bottom line, we get all the way to the bottom, we get to advanced statistical models, we understand that the trees are going to fall over, we've assessed tree soil health, wind speeds, and of course what you're going to find out is that the local volcano erupted and all the trees are going to fall over anyway. So there's the end of your statistical analysis. The challenge that Louis has offered us is, what is the intelligent use of big data, and how are we using this to serve our customer? What are we doing to eliminate waste, quality at the right cost? So I'm going to give a very short example as a launching point. Grupo Antolin worked with its 3PL ProTrans starting about 2 years ago. I would not necessarily have shared this type of information last year. And what we do is something that every single successful tier or OEM does now, which is we certainly do EDI forecasting. We make sure that our 3PL has a full EDI broadcast, mirrored and shadowed as we send the releases. So what we do is we go through a process where it's optimized, recommendations are made. One of the inputs we have is we look at this in this section for the future week, next week. And in the exact same report, what we also do is we now look at weeks 2 through +5 to look for additional anomalies, places where releases can be adjusted, understanding what does the data show. Last but not least, as we look through weeks 6 through 10, we run the optimizations, make adjustments and plans in our release forecasts, and then we will consider re-executing. One of the differences probably between Grupo Antolin is I am very aggressive in working with our team. So we actually do this weekly. Every single week, the plant has an opportunity with the 3PL, and usually I can manage to attend 50% of these on any given week. This is virtually meaningless other than the fact that we do have a supply part level information available. And I guess where we're trying to go is basic data used proactively or reactively for a 6-plant grouping that I picked out 2 weeks ago. Ran an average of 94%. Given the fact that everyone here has seen the email and you understand I am a data user, now you're probably getting to another picture, which is I'm a data pusher. So what's the point? The point here is as a launching pad, because as the industry moves forward with 3PLs or with tier ones and with OEMs, we seem to do it in a very traditional fashion. We have on-time performance characteristics, all the data here, but I would like everybody to understand that where we are teetering on the brink is what are the actual data outputs as a result of this project, because this is where I think we are getting ready to go, which is we have an entire group of data fields I don't know whether it quite qualifies as big data, but it certainly is going to qualify as data analytics capability, where we have 2 years worth of manipulatable and accessible information with these fields. This is, I guess, a practical example. Again, I'm the box of rocks in the room. So, now what? First question. In order to do this, we have to do data mining. I'm hoping, again, I'm believing that the data mining is a concept that's familiar to everyone. However, once again, I'm from Kentucky. We understand mining. There are several concepts that we have to understand about mining. And again, I see people laughing because people have probably tried some data mining here. Very basic. Study, you have to have the objective, engineering and architecture, you have to be ready to dig, and most importantly, you have to have good airflow. You have to remember to breathe, and you have to have hot air going out. In addition, as you're starting to do data mining, you also have to have the ability when you're doing mining to get things in quickly and out quickly. And this is going to become a question for the people that are more advanced, more in the IT field, because I'm uncertain as to whether the current information technologies can be maintained by the user or understood by the user or decision-making groups. And I'm not trying to be a naysayer. I'm offering some cautions and some lessons learned from my perspective. So as we wrap up and get to the meat of the matter, punching my button here, what I'm going to show you is a series of graphs. Hopefully these will be a launching point for you and further discussion later during the Q&A, where we go through a standard selection of on-time performance metrics. Virtually every TMS and every company at this point has these types of things. These are single independent or X and Y variable analysis. They can be used either proactively or reactively. One of the differences for me is the data sets that you're using here are at least 3,000 or 4,000 activities each, 3,000 or 4,000 events, which is why I wanted to show them to you. We have on-time location pie charts. You can certainly have things in Tableau that are high visibility impact views. I'm going to show you what might be a new one, which is called a heat map. Has everyone seen a heat map before? Regarding on-time performance, one of the most interesting observations I can make is in over 10,000 lane events, for some unknown reason, Thursday is an awful day for on-time performance. This is a trend that no one knew about. This is a trend that we discovered running larger scale statistical data, and I have absolutely no idea why in our current carrier base or our current plant locations. In addition, as we start to look at it, Thursdays, specifically in June and July, have a tragic performance. Do I have an understanding why this is? No, I do not. But again, this is the benefit sometimes of data analysis. As Louis talked about, it tends to uncover trends. We're doing a cost distance regression analysis, trying to understand our CPM or cost per mile values. This is real data. I've covered up the scale, but yes, we're very heavily weighted. For those of you who have not done that, CPM, using a regression analysis, gives you a very good predictor, in theory, a predictor of not only how your lane raw costs are doing, but it gives it a good predictor as to whether you can make calculations for CPM on a costing basis or on an estimating basis. You can use the exact same type of regression analysis as a more advanced statistical data set, and you can actually run it by facility or by geographic location. I guess I would take a look at regression analysis when you're looking at business analytics and see what you come up with. There's only one or two other comments I'd like to make. Once again, Grupo Antolin and myself, I'm a tier 1 user. I'm going to have to answer the question that was asked by Louis in saying, I don't know that we as a tier 1 use big data. That's the honest answer. I'm going to be very interested to speak to people at dinner and understand if there are other tier 1s who can look and say, we use big data very interested in Anupam because he does represent JCI, and I have high hopes for big data. The challenge now also, as Louis talked about in the morning comments, is where do we go next? I think this has been a very tranquil year. Volumes are up. And I think that it's a good question that's been challenged to us, which is, are we using our time wisely, and are we moving the business forward? But because I also want to make certain that everybody gets their value out of today, especially the people that stuck around until 4 o'clock, I'm going to wrap up with one other item. A different definition of big data is haruspicy. Would anyone like to say this? Haruspicy. Haruspicy is the divination by a haruspex, a form of minor priests, and in fact is the interpretation of the future, omens, portents, by virtue of inspecting the entrails and intestines of sacrificed animals, most usually sheep and goats. So when we're talking about big data, I want to make sure that everybody has a word that you can take home. You will sit in your very important board meetings. You will work with 3PLs and OEMs, but in the back of your mind, I want to enrich your life. I see the smiles, and I want everybody to learn the word haruspicy, which is reading the future in the intestines of goats. It has been documented evidence. It has been an active practice since the year 4000 BC up to 3000 BCE, and I think, depending on how we see today's panel, we're about to figure out if it's been going on a little longer. Thank you very much for your time.
You know, they say this first step to recovery is admission of a problem, right? And Thomas started by telling us he's a user, and I think, you know, he's on the road to recovery. Maybe some of you can help him. He might be a bit of a hopeless case, though, I have to say. But no, thank you. Thank you very much. That was obviously a very interesting presentation, a lot of interesting ideas there, whether you believe in big data or not, but obviously there is potential, or data mining, however we're defining it, and obviously a lot to dig in there. But we'll come back to it on the Q&A. I'd like to now invite Scott Dewicki from Gartner.
I think I'm not quite as tall as some of the other speakers, unfortunately. Thanks, Christopher. Appreciate it very much. And I have to confess, like Thomas, my name is Scott, and I'm also a user. And when I got into college, I got into the really hard stuff, got a degree in aerospace engineering. Certainly a privilege to share some insights on the emergence of digital business, what we at Gartner believe it will mean to the automotive industry. Much of what you'll hear will reinforce, I think, certainly what Thomas talked about, but also what we heard this morning, and hopefully set up for tomorrow's discussion as well. It may be a bit of a preview, maybe a bit of reflection and review on what you heard this morning, but hopefully I'll still have a surprise or two up my sleeve. Since I'm the newbie at this conference, I'll be briefly introducing Gartner to those of you who are unfamiliar with us, but then I'll quickly define digital business, talk about how it's related to analytics and big data, and what we are already seeing happening in supply chains as a result of the emergence. I'll discuss how automotive OEMs and suppliers can prepare for it, and then I'll wrap up. Gartner is an independent research and advisory firm founded in 1979. We're a $2 billion company with headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut, and global operations. We do research into 5 core areas of best business practice: supply chain, of which I represent, but also the IT and marketing areas, finance and investment, as well as the high-tech and telecom industries. The subject of digital business is growing, certainly in both scope and importance in our research agenda across all of the areas of our core research. What is digital business? You might know it by other names, and I think we heard Christopher use one of the names just in his introduction. Industry 4.0 is another term that is often used to describe or used to name digital business. Also, brilliant factory of the future, those kinds of things. Its components are really the subject of this entire conference over the next 2 days. The so-called Internet of Things, big data, predictive and prescriptive analytics, complex event processing, 3D printing and additive manufacturing, and so on. Digital business is all of that. But more profoundly, it's the way in which these ingredients are combined to create new business models. Analytics play a huge role in digital business. One emerging practice is to create, and I think to Thomas's point, is to create centers of excellence that put the business functional expertise, analytical modeling, and data science together into the same co-located organization. The functional experts are the ones responsible for providing business context to the decision makers and also translating the business problem back into the COE for the data scientists and for the analytical modelers to tackle. The modelers, of course, describe the nature of the problem in mathematical terms, and data scientists understand how to extract the information from vast sets of data. Most of the automotive examples that we've heard about today, such as telematics, for instance, are about linking the product and the consumer with the OEM. But automotive supply chain is about to get a front row seat into the digital business revolution. More about that in a minute. One of our recent surveys asked more than 500 supply chain executives across all industry segments what they considered to be their mission-critical priorities. In other words, what were their key contributions to corporate outcomes and success? The circles on the left side of the screen represent the top 3 answers, or the top 3 most cited answers among these executives, and they're common across about 90% of all those answers received. They probably look pretty familiar to you. But that same survey also revealed that of the top 10 initiatives that companies were undertaking to tackle those 3 priorities, only 2 were directly related to the overall linking of corporate business strategy with supply chain strategy and outcomes. In other words, 80% of the supply chain effort today is being devoted to inwardly focused cost takeout and operational excellence goals. Now look at the right side of this slide, and by the way, that's probably one of the surprises for you. This year, as we do every year, we surveyed 200 or so CEOs across all industries and asked them to comment on their corporate strategies and what outcomes they were trying to achieve. And we matched that against the strategies and capabilities pursued by the chief supply chain officers and chief procurement officers that we study and talk with. And what we found is a huge gap in those supply chain strategies and also the talent and experience of those CSCOs and CPOs, an experience that limits their contribution to corporate outcomes and to the CEO's agenda most particularly. Something else we found. In many circumstances, CEOs were already interviewing candidates to replace currently sitting CSCOs and CPOs, and most had no idea that their jobs were about to be replaced. So when Louis talked about the naysayers earlier today, our research shows that the attitude may be self-correcting in many of those companies. The message is clear. Supply chains must play a more direct role in the delivery of customer-aligned value. Digital business driven by big data and analytics is one of those areas. So in the last couple of years, we've begun to examine the journey of digital business from the perspective of the supply chain. Our survey of about 100 supply chain leaders this year found that most say they're getting on board the train, but 60% couldn't tell you how they're going to get there. I suspect that many of them may not really even know what digital business is, or even analytics or big data, or how they're going to play a role in their supply chain and the contributions they're making to outcomes for their customers and for their companies. This translates into a compelling need, certainly, for executives to quickly gain insight into and clarity into both the purpose and the readiness for these capabilities. But there's bound to be some uncertainty. Some of the underlying technology, quite frankly, and the process capabilities are too immature for a complex industry or a complex environment like an automotive supply chain. Nevertheless, there are a few perspectives that can be undertaken right now, and I'll talk about one of them. In the automotive industry, supply chain success has typically been defined from the point of view of the plant: cost, utilization, efficiency, throughput, material availability. In a digital business, that purpose shifts from the inward-facing view to outside-in. The profitable delivery of customer value becomes the central objective. So from that customer point back, Everything else is aligned: people, processes, technology, measures of performance, including the plant. Contrary to what some of you may think, however, that is not in conflict with lean and operational excellence principles. In fact, it's the highest expression of lean. The ultimate customer, those whose money and value and loyalty we're trying to get, become the axis around which all of our companies eventually revolve. Everyone likes to talk about Apple and their habit of happily obsoleting their own product categories. But it's not just high-tech and consumer products who are pursuing this kind of transformation. Heavy equipment manufacturers, for example, are aggressively aligning their supply chain strategies and capabilities to the right side of this chart, enabling them to use the same physical infrastructure, the same physicals, to produce different outcomes for the customer, whether those outcomes are based on lowest price, highest availability, flexible product configurations, service level, and so on, or some combination. And analytics are a big part, it's really at the heart of this differentiation in outcomes. The sensing and translation of customer value, what we often call being demand-driven, across not just sales and marketing, but also consistently and seamlessly into the expected contributions of supply chain planners, production schedulers, product teams, and suppliers, is the start of that journey. And there's a good reason for manufacturers to pursue those objectives. Our research shows that companies who reach these kinds of maturity levels achieve a considerable advantage in their financial ratios over their industry peers, as measured by growth, profit, RONA, and so on. Why is that? Well, it's because they can compete for business on a value proposition that goes way past product features and functions. By the way, those product features and functions that our competitors often duplicate and at a lower price. Ultimately, the best of the best create what amounts to a walled garden around themselves, their suppliers, partners, and their customers to produce a customer experience that integrates products, services, supply chain, and sales and marketing, and capabilities from which everyone benefits. Most of you have already been moving aggressively to build some of the foundational capabilities that link product development and engineering, manufacturing operations, supply chain, order fulfillment, and sales and marketing functions. Governance models such as sales and operations planning, or S&OP, is one of the means by which information and insights into customer value and demand are shared across functions so that decisions that balance company financial objectives with delivery of customer value can be quickly and consistently made. Getting that house in order is a prerequisite to digital business. Being able to sense, shape, and actively manage demand not only with the immediate time horizon, but also across the mid and long-term planning horizons is essential to predictably and reliably achieving financial outcomes for this year's operating plan as well as next year and the year following. Word of caution, though, and this goes back to something that Thomas said. Much of the gee whiz elements of digital business hype is just that, hype. There's not yet a corporate supply chain executive in the world who'd be mistaken for being Captain Kirk on the bridge of the Enterprise. Most of the truly autonomous systems and the related capabilities are probably 3 to 5 years off and maybe more before they're going to be robust enough to really take on an automotive supply chain, not to mention the talent and the skills that are needed to understand how to deploy these kinds of capabilities and what to do with them. Nevertheless, there are plenty of capabilities that have real-world benefit for the automotive industry right now. We're starting to see innovation in particular around the use of data and analytics tools already available to improve the demand forecast quality. That improved quality in the form of reduced error, variance, and bias over time, and will over time improve things like schedule stability, reduce dealer inventories, and most importantly, improve contribution margin and cash flow. Went too far. There we go. Nope, that was right. All right. So as I've hopefully shown, digital business incorporates much of what we're already doing, but it requires us to see our role through a different lens, that of the consumer. That lens is shaped by data and analytics. This outside-in perspective and taking the long view of value creation is ripe for the taking. Supply chain, and particularly the automotive supply chain, is going to play a key role in realizing those ends. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott, giving us a sense there of, again, what kind of changes are ahead, give us some clarity on a bit of what might be hype right now, but again, the direction that we're moving. So we've heard from 2 declared users so far, and I wonder if Tom Kroswek from Ryder might come off and at least start us off by telling us about his addictions as well when it comes to data and supply chain.
Thank you, Christopher. Good afternoon. As Thomas was talking about, when we talk about data, we're trying to simplify the data and actually compress it. When we hear about big data and analytics, some of the things that really strike me is what we're really looking for is to make that information actionable. When you look at data and a lot of the discussion today, as you dive through the data and do the analysis, you want to find the actionable component of the data set. So we want to talk about 3 things. In the automotive industry, there's lots of data, right? Now, there's EDI, there's MRP, there's ERP information, just lots of information in the automotive industry that's available to analyze and to draw perspective from. We want to put together a course of action, how it can actually make that data actionable. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, we want to demonstrate some examples in the automotive logistics industry that demonstrate how looking at that data, you can actually make it actionable. Okay, and we want to do that from inbound, service parts and aftermarket, and from finished vehicles perspective. Oh, my fault. Very good. So we have volume and we have the origin of the data. So origin, you can see the ecosystem of the automotive industry. We have OEMs, we have suppliers, we have dealers, we have logistics service providers, as well as we have carriers and other service providers. So we have EDI information, we have the MRP information, generating hosts of information. We also have the bill of material, hours of operation, transactional data from sales orders that are originated by the dealerships. We also have remarketing information that is also originated with the dealers and in that industry. Carriers introduce GPS information as well. There's also capacity, fleet capacity, that may be information that's out there in the ecosystem. And then finally, we have logistics service providers as well, generating information from TMS systems as well as warehouse management systems, in addition to collecting all that other information that's been generated in the systems. So let's look at some of the volume that's associated with that. There's 14 OEMs in North America. There's over 76 plants, either in existence or planned to be in existence. There's 60 platforms of vehicles that are producing 160 different models of vehicles. If every single vehicle that is produced equates to roughly 1,700 parts per vehicle, that adds up to over 280,000 parts with transactional information being produced every single day, every single hour. Right? So millions and millions of transactions just originated by the OEMs. When we talk about the suppliers, there's more than 400 suppliers if we go across all tiers of suppliers. Again, there's over 5,000 plants associated with those tiers, millions of parts, millions of transactions, as well as the information that they have to retain around aftermarket and service parts information. From a dealership perspective, there's over 17,500 dealerships, 150 dealership groups. This year, there's over 6.5 million vehicles sold. Again, every one of those transactions just generating immense amounts of data. Carriers, if you include premium carriers, rail carriers, ocean carriers, every type of carrier in the industry. There's over 2,000 carriers that are also generating all kinds of GPS and EDI information. So just, again, we talk about big data, lots of data definitely exists in the automotive industry. There's 250 plus logistics service providers in the industry as well, with their transportation management, warehouse management systems, as well as generating their own EDI as transactions take place. There's multiple other third-party providers in the industry as well, providing port services, packaging services, sequencing services. So just, again, wealth of data being generated throughout the industry. So how do we make data actionable? The definition, my definitions aren't as good as Thomas's. His are very good, and I don't know if actionable is a word that you're going to take away from this meeting, but that was the definition that I had in place, relating to or being information that allows a decision to be made or an action to be taken. So actionable data obviously allows us to make a decision or an action. So the first step is collecting the data. Having the databases and the interchanges in place to actually seamlessly collect the EDI, the MRP, the bill of material information, so you can actually look it over, do the regression analysis, and those types of activities, but it has to be seamless and consistent and almost automated to the point that you're just able to receive that data seamlessly. The next step is to visualize and analyze it. So using tools such as Tableau and ClickView, you can take that first cursory look at what the data looks like and some of the data points and elements of the data that jump out at you. Thomas was talking about the regression line regarding the cost per mile and how that changes as you move away from a geographic perspective. It's a perfect example of using visual data analytics. The next step is to understand and optimize the data. So using tools like LlamaSoft, JDA's tools, and other tools out there in the market, Appian Logistics, you can work at a strategic, tactical, and operational level and actually run your optimizations and further understand that data. And finally, the last step is to put that information into action. Respond to what you've just learned about the data. So what's represented there is a inventory analysis for a tier 1 supplier. And the action that was taken was actually reconstruct their ABC service stock for their manufacturing materials so they could actually lower their cost of inventory carrying costs, but actually have more of the right material based on a geographic location and distance traveled to the assembly plant. Some other examples in the automotive industry, I didn't have any preview of the discussion earlier today around material flows, but the exact same examples that were discussed in that segment are exactly some of the same things that we captured. So container optimization. Now when you look at an OEM, the majority of the transportation is 80 to 85% truckload. So the biggest opportunity is optimizing that truckload freight and getting the greatest cube utilization. If it's currently at 85% or 90%, what can we do to take it to 95? So, some of the discussion today was around efficiently returning the returnable containers. But what really I think needs to be looked at is that puzzle of how those containers get put together inside the truck. It's much easier to get perfect utilization of a load if you're using one container type. It gets exponentially that much more difficult the more different container types you add into the system. We actually have looked at some studies where we can look and break it down where 30% of all the inbound truckload to a particular OEM is all in one container type. Obviously, much easier to optimize that freight if it's in one container type. So the idea or the action that needs to be taken is try and reduce the number of different container types. The more that you reduce that, if you can go from, we have instances where people have more than 200 different container types. If you can reduce that down to 50 or 25, not necessarily 4, but the more you can reduce that, the greater utilization you can get out of that optimization. Container pooling was something else that was mentioned, and part of the discussion, the CHEP folks were talking about how you can use container pooling. Well, that's an external use of container pooling, but there's also an internal use of container pooling. So if I'm an OEM and I have a supplier that's in Mexico and they're shipping to the Midwest, and I also have a supplier in the Midwest that's shipping to Mexico, if they're shipping in the same container type, I can take advantage of that container pooling. And that can be an internal situation. That you don't have to go externally to an external container pool. But I think there's a mix between the two, external, internal, that can be a benefit to the industry. When we talk about the tiers in manufacturing operations is a little bit different. Whereas the OEMs, the largest percentage of the freight is truckload freight, with the tiers, the largest percentage is less than truckload freight. So the opportunity for most of them. So the opportunity is around consolidation. Having the consolidation points in the right place, the number of location points, as well as the suppliers that are serviced through those location points make all the difference in the world. Inventory optimization, I already talked about that a little bit, but actually linking up production schedules and the logistics department together to make sure that you have the right amount of material on hand through an inventory optimization would also pose a big benefit from a tier and manufacturing perspective. From a service parts and aftermarket perspective, service parts, the supplier ship direct programs or the direct ship programs are probably the greatest advantage or the greatest opportunity as far as that part of the business. The ability to ship directly from a supplier to a dealer or a cross-dock close to that dealer is more advantageous than going through the national and then the primary distribution center. So the more activity, the more freight that can flow directly from the supplier to the dealer or close to the dealer, the more advantageous to the service parts. From a PDC perspective, it can do a PDC optimization, a network optimization from PDCs, but you can also do a service radius optimization. So again, activities that really are focused on making the data actionable. What is a service radius? What is my plan for every SKU from a service parts perspective? And then finally, from a finished vehicle perspective, we talk about load factor. What of those 160 models of vehicles that are being produced fit best on a tri-level? Which of those models fit best on a bi-level? What's the mix of the two? Figuring those types of data sets out really would pay big dividends. Then we have port optimization. There's 30 ports in the United States, maybe 33 ports in North America. Optimizing which ones are used, how many of them are used, how those link into the rail system, all beneficial to the finished vehicle industry. And finally, railhead optimization, the number and the location of which ones are used and which dealers are serviced out of those locations, also a great actionable data point. So I hope I was able to show you that there's a wealth of data in the automotive logistics industry that can do a lot of analysis and convert to actionable data. I walked you through the process of making your data actionable. And also, I think I've given you some pretty good examples of, for the automotive industry, that really can be beneficial for inbound, service parts and aftermarket, and finished vehicle logistics. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Tom. Again, some examples there of how data can be used across all segments of the supply chain. Before we go into Q&A, I'd like to ask Anupam Garg from Johnson Controls to perhaps introduce himself and perhaps some remarks on what we've heard so far.
So we've all seen about what is big data, and many of us have told about how do we get all of the data actionable. So I'll give you a perspective of what is happening within one of the tier one suppliers whom I represent today. So we have lots of data in different silos, in different islands, in different applications. But where we face a big challenge and a big opportunity is how do we bring all of the data together? Because when I go to my supply chain management, they want to know about supply chain logistics, the freight, the inventory, how we are doing at a plant from a supplier rating perspective. But then they want the information about cost. So I need to integrate that with financials. So where we are as a strategy looking for is bringing in all of the different data which resides in different islands and different systems, and how do we bring it together? So it's an extremely large initiative to do that. So where my team is doing is that we have started some initial pilots, because our goal is that we would not succeed unless we can show an ROI. So my team is working on a few projects where we are leveraging all of the concepts of big data, but going small with a big view in mind. And the goal is that we have something which our executives can use, and then we can get more funding towards it. So as an IT person, I'm really my main task right now over here is how do I sell the big data concept within my own company to get more funding for the big projects.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I think it's an interesting point of how you're using data, obviously, in an internal way, and perhaps also the small data could be of some value here as well. So we've had perhaps what we could call finish our confessions from data junkies for this session. We're going to open it up for some Q&A now. So we'll have mics going around the room. If anybody has a question, you can please raise your hand and say your name and company. But don't think that you're getting to the cocktail reception any sooner by not asking any questions, because I've got a few. But I will start with Scott, actually, because you sort of raised the point that there's a lot of hype as well as ideas right now. And so could you maybe give us an example of who's ahead right now in this kind of area in terms of sectors or companies or whatever it might be? So maybe there might not be a smart factory as such, but who's kind of ahead of the game?
I think in terms of which industries would be ahead, it's almost certainly going to be consumer products, a little bit retail, but certainly consumer products, companies like Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Colgate, Palmolive, those kinds of companies, as well as certainly high-tech electronics, Intel, Cisco in particular. And the reason for that is there are typically market forces that happen there, where on the one hand you have very rapid product development life cycles, very short windows to get products to market, and in some cases, certainly in the case of many consumer products, not terribly complicated products to engineer, but maybe the window to get to market is the distinguishing factor there. So I would say that those are probably the industries where we see the most innovation going on, and probably the ones that are the furthest ahead at this point.
And where would you kind of put automotive in this spectrum?
I think there's some good work going on in automotive right now, and I think it's tackling the kinds of problems that have always kind of vexed. If you look at, for example, the challenges of demand forecast accuracy, for example, and being able to assess the quality of the forecast down below, let's say, the full vehicle level, down to the option uptake level or option code level, I think that's where we see a lot of effort being placed right now in trying to get your arms around what the independent variables are, what are the things that drive forecast accuracy, and what can you do to improve them. the advantages of improving those things are obvious. That means greater schedule stability. It means better information out to the suppliers. It means lower cost, and not just on the expediting side, not just on the premium side, but really across the board. Those are and also opportunities to improve then contribution margin, revenue, and so forth.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Right in the back.
Just to follow up to that, what about, I'll call it the interfaces between other sources of information? For example, the accuracy of forecasts from your sales department. You can have a supply chain that's really slick from the point that you create the forecast or the manufacturing, the plan, and then you can slicken that all up, but there are kind of external forces within the OEM that are going to have dramatic impact on or disruptive effects on that plan.
Yeah, I would say that that's absolutely the case. What we would say is that typically when you do the translation of, let's say, the sales forecast, oftentimes what we'll see happening typically in an automotive OEM, for example, with suppliers it's a little bit different, but at the OEM level, let's say, there will be an effort in trying to translate the sales forecast across different time horizons. So certainly within the 1 year time horizon out to the maybe current year +1, out to 3 to 5 years. And each one of those has error, has bias, has variance involved. And so the effort is to try to understand the sources of the error, the sources of the bias and variance, and get your arms around that, and then turn that into information then that is actionable by the supply chain. The typical places where we see the biggest gaps in terms of where those handoffs occur are particularly in the midterm horizon. So oftentimes we'll see where everybody in the product planning horizon, so 3 to 5 years out, everyone is more or less together in terms of understanding what kind of business model are you going after, what are the targets for those product segments, and so forth. And in the current year, when it's utter chaos, when you're trying to launch the product, everybody's getting back together again, trying to solve problems. But it's that midterm horizon, which is really where sales and operations planning reside, that you see now many of the automotive OEMs putting some real effort into try to cleaning up the data and handing the forecast from sales and marketing and from the product side over to supply chain for actioning.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? One for Thomas. We talked about the sort of weekly data crunches, I suppose. I don't know if you're sort of laying out the goats intestines together at that point and going through them, but is this, besides you mentioned the weird things that you pick up, like the poor productivity or the poor deliveries on Thursdays and in June and July, have you been able to glean some meaningful information as well that you've now implemented and made changes in your supply chain that has come from this process?
Yes. I'm sorry, I have the sense of humor and it's just unfortunate. Yes, absolutely.
Is there any thing you'd like to share?
There are situations where, even in the data we showed you, or the data I showed you, going back to actionable items, there's two different approaches that we've been trying to take, and I'm going to go sideways, support the team, but a little bit my own. One of them is I absolutely agree on actionable items. In my view, especially because Grupo Antolin is decentralized, when this started this process, those actionable items and the data outputs need to go to the correct level. So in that particular example, I am not the one that sends the releases. The releases, as driven by the customer demand and as managed by a materials planner, is actually what drives the transportation system. They are the decision makers. So from my perspective, the reason we have been very ferocious in processing this with the data planner is to move the data planner from just planning on materials into planning on materials and logistics, trying to take the supply chain and start putting those disparate segments together like everyone else has been showing much better on their slides, and say, okay, let's achieve smoothity on this particular section. When we look at the other projects, we look at situations that we're developing now. They are related to cost, they're related to on-time performance. These are things that are more appropriate to my level and the level of the managers. I'm not, I'm hesitating because, in fact, I know within a decimal point of exactly what our on-time performance is, as well as our costs. We have a very good on-time performance also as a result of working with our 3PL. Have I answered your question with enough solidity? And I want to apologize to the audience. I'm a little leery of just saying, oh, woo, we have, 97% plus on-time performance. These processes have all been evolutionary over the course of the last 2 years.
I mean, you mentioned your 3PL there. Are they playing a big role in sort of crunching this data? I mean, is that open to the LLPs, or is that something more from your side?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's not only and again, Anupam hit on a very good point, an incredibly good point, and also Tom did, which is one of the reasons for selecting a 3PL in general, not just our current 3PL ProTrans, was also because we have an innate problem getting the information centralized. And the more, I think at the level of many tier ones, if you're not using an ERP system, MFG Pros or SAP or some of the other ones that have inherent transportation modules which connect into financial modules, which connect into materials management modules, then you have a very difficult time putting these data sets together in a large enough or small enough scale to be able to extract something.
Thank you. We have two questions. We'll start with Ruud there, and then we'll move in front. So, thank you.
Hello, my name is Ruud Vossenbelt from Inform. 10 years ago, people talked about business intelligence, supply chain management. These days, since 1, 2, 3 years, people talk about big data. I'm very interested to see what is the difference with what 10 years ago was business intelligence and supply chain management, and what are the new things that are useful for this group to learn out of the new big data concept that has come up in the last 2, 3 years. Maybe you can explain us a bit more, Scott, about what you think is really new in that area.
Sure. If I were to look back 5 and 10 years ago at business intelligence, it was really a concept built around describing what was happening. It was descriptive data. It was descriptive analytics. What happened or what is happening. What we're seeing now with the analytical modeling that's going on is really telling me more predictive analytics, what could happen or what might happen. Where it's going is to be able to say, what should I do about it? And if you think about, for example, back to, for instance, like IBM's Watson, for example. IBM's Watson is built on a capability that says, I'm going to give you a series of options, and I'm going to look at all of the information, I'm going to look at the analytics, I'm going to put it against a model, and I'm going to say, here is a level of confidence that says, here's what I think is going to happen next. Here's the correct answer based on a level of confidence. I'm going to rank the top 10, and I'm 90% confident on answer number 1, for example. So that's where it's going. Eventually what you'll see is that prescriptive analytics then gets tied into, for instance, what's called complex event processing that looks for patterns of information on an analytics engine and says, based upon this pattern, what I see is that the following is the current condition, and based on the evolution of what that model seems to have been doing, here's where I think it's going, based on a certain number of inputs. So that's eventually where it will go. We're nowhere close to that yet, not even close. Now, there are some industries, consumer products being one of them, that are getting very close to that. Probably within in fact, in some circumstances, you do see that kind of autonomy in the supply chain where you have brilliant systems doing some of those kinds of decisions, more or less in a lights out kind of a way. But for industries like the automotive industry with much more complex supply chains, extremely complex distribution networks, not to mention the complexity of the products themselves, you are ways off before we get to something like that.
Anu?
So from an IT perspective, I like to weigh on this one. So 10 years back, within our tier 1 company, most of the data was really in one systems, or they were like Access or Excel. We did not have data as much as we have today. From a technology standpoint, we did not have enough technology to process the data or manipulate the data to convert it into actionable information. So 10 years back, most of our users, when they talked about analytics, it was reports. Show me my general ledger reports. Show me my reports about inventory. Or show me my cycle count report. But today, when we are looking for where we are, most of the companies have systems which are integrated, they're interfaced, so they have a lot more data, and we have much more technology also available. So we are able to do cubes, drill down, we can do different kind of modelings. So I think that big data is where we're going, but it's also because of technology and also the availability of the data that we have, as most companies do have good ERP systems and financial systems.
Thank you. We had another question in the front here.
So who guards against misinterpretation and incorrect action? It seems in an early science, we have a lot of data. We have a lot of people wanting to take action using data. Who guards against misinterpretation?
It's a very good question. I mean, it's an early science. I don't know if it's an early science, but it's definitely an early stage of adoption. And so I can tell you what we are doing within our company is that we have multiple projects going on. Some have failed and some have not been very successful. But some of the projects which have been most successful with big data, or let's call it analytics, have been the one which were concise, were short duration. So the appetite for 1 year, 2 year, millions of dollars project has this not much now. So short duration projects where the business can get the ROI, they can get something in hand immediately with a smaller subset of data and then expand on it. So to answer your question, Bill, if there is misinterpretation, the scope is less. And people get smarter, it evolves, so that would be that's what we are trying to do.
And I think just to kind of add to that a little bit, where I also would see, that's really the role. I mentioned, for example, the centers of excellence, supply chain analytics centers of excellence. Typically what we'll see is that somebody who's in that center of excellence has the business functional understanding. So it's not just, you're not just going to have, the propeller heads sitting inside these four walls, sitting over their pot boiling and trying to divine, animal spirits. So there is that geek to English kind of translation through that business functional expert who sits inside that center of excellence.
I'd just like to add, as far as that goes, on a retail side, you have cost to serve. On the manufacturing side, if we had a cost to manufacture, and I know John Begg talked about total cost of delivery. If we put it in the simplest terms as if you're not reducing your cost to serve or you're not reducing your cost to manufacture, then it's probably not a good action, right? So if we can put it in those terms and get to those types of references, I think that total cost of delivery or a cost to manufacture, and then if you're reducing it, all the better, let's move forward with the action. I don't know if we can ever get to those simple terms, but it'd be great if we could.
Okay, thank you for the question and the answers there. I think we might have time for one more question if there is one. Or if not, we're going to move on to our survey. So I think we're going to leave it there with that question about about data. But I'd like to thank our panel for their presentations and discussions. It was very interesting. Before we ship you off to the gala dinner, we're going to do the voting, as we mentioned earlier. So what I'd ask you all to do is to log on to our live site, and we're going to do some voting there. So again, the way you do that, the web link is up there. Use your smartphone, your computer, your tablet, whatever. There's the link there. It's also in your program. And again, you're going to log into the live site using your email address and your registration code, which is on your badge. So if we can try and do that, that would be great. We'll also be getting we'll be getting answers from people who are watching this outside of the room. We usually have a similar, a couple dozen to 100 people watching at any time from around the world. And just a quick message for those who are watching from outside of the room. Well, first off, hi, Mom. Secondly, there's a slight delay between what you see and what you hear. So if you don't listen to me saying the question, look at the poll, because the poll will appear in actual time. And if you were to just listen to me reading the question, it would be too late to vote. So that's just, again, don't worry about it if you're in the room, but if you're watching from outside. Also, when you get to the tab, if you're on a mobile phone, you have to click the voting tab, which is at the bottom. This is the way it's optimized for a mobile phone. And maybe just whilst you're finishing doing that, once again, we're going to have our gala dinner hosted by Ryder tonight, and we have coaches that will be leaving from the Motor Lobby. That's the one near to the main Marriott entrance or exit. So you can take the elevators right in the middle, or you can go back to the hotel lobby and take the elevators down there, and we'll have some buses leaving. I think we'll have a couple of buses going, after this session. All right, so hopefully you're all logged on now, and obviously you're just going to vote by selecting the answer that you see. So our first question, and again, these come from some of our gold sponsors who submitted, is from APL Vascor. And the question is, there has been a big fall in oil prices in 2015. What will your 2016 budget for vehicle sales or for cost assume? So will you assume that they are A, significantly lower than now, B, that they're slightly lower, C, about the same as now, D, slightly higher, or E, significantly higher? So let's see who's the commodity traders out here who are going to be able to profit. So pretty overwhelming there. More than half believe that we're in a prolonged period. This is kind of, as Brandon Mason, I think, suggested in the first session, that kind of aligns with most outlooks right now, that the price of oil isn't really heading up or down anytime soon. But I think those of you who've been around this event, we have a pretty poor track record when it comes to predicting the price of oil. So you might want to, buffer in a few other considerations there. So moving on to our next question, and this is from CTM, from Convertible Trailer Manufacturers. So the question is on empty miles, do low fuel prices make you, again, we're still on fuel here, A, not have to be so conscious of them, remain conscious but frankly relieve the pressure to do more about them right now, act the same as when fuel prices were higher, D, be conscious that they might cost more in the future, or E, invest the savings you're making now and avoiding them in the future. So what is the fuel price making you, how is it making you act? So as we adjust there, you remain conscious, but frankly, it's relieving the pressure to do more about them right now. So perhaps worryingly making people complacent. Although we might say that 60% had a different view. So anyway, that's the top answer there. Our next question comes from Penske. And the question is, do you struggle with shipment visibility at the US-Mexico border? And the answer is yes, a great deal. B, yes, but it's not significant for my total operations. C, not really. Or D, no, I have good visibility. So how are you struggling or not struggling at the US-Mexico border? Okay, so the US-Mexico border is not a terrible problem for many of the people, at least in this room. So maybe, Lou, we have to rethink the conference in January. I think it's all sorted. Our next question, which comes from WWL. And the question is, thinking broadly, what segment requires the most change to meet OEM future needs for finished vehicle transportation? So what transport mode? Is it A, road, B, rail, or C, ocean? So again, pretty overwhelming. Most of you think that road needs to actually change most to meet the needs for vehicle transportation. Perhaps there's an allusion, there's some reference in mind there to some of the technology changes we may see. Our last question takes a little bit of a different turn. It's from Chep. And the question is, what is pooling? Is pooling the game where the first player to sink the black ball wins? Is pooling the sport which combines soccer and basketball in the water? Is pooling the way to match buyers and sellers without revealing the price? Is pooling the technology of building tanks in which to swim? Or is it sharing resources or equipment owned by a third party to obtain economies of scale and reduce waste? And I think the World Championship for that one is going on right now in England, so. So, pooling is the sharing of equipment owned by third party to obtain economies of scale. Most of you seem to have an idea of what pooling is, what might align with Chep's. Although worrying, you do seem to think some of you do seem to think it takes place in a pool, so I'm not really sure. Okay, well that's the end of our question. It's a bit of fun, and it's always interesting to get some live responses like that. Again, I'd like to, thanks again to our panel for a great discussion. And now please do join us. Those of you who've registered for the gala dinner, please do join us. And those of you who've also registered later on for the Afterglow party hosted by Stagiaire, we'll also see you back here later on tonight. So thanks very much.